So thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to spend some time today talking about E-2 visa options where the investment amount is low and risky E-2 cases. A few things I wanted to talk about before we get started. So some of you may know this law firm, Scott Legal, was founded on an E-2 visa several years ago. Our founder, Ian Scott, is here personally on an E-2 visa. Really understands what E-2 visa applicants are going through. The firm has also renewed its E-2 visa, has gone through that process as well. Our firm is a full service immigration firm that focuses primarily on E-2 visas. We process hundreds of E-2 visas, and typically we process E-2 visas that are considered higher risk, which means kind of lower investment amount visas. We process to consulates all around the world, but primarily we process in Toronto and in London. So we will continue our webinar series, doing at least 2 webinars a month on different topics. And we have several webinars coming up, in the coming months. At the end of this webinar, we'll send you a few things. You'll receive this PowerPoint. You'll receive an E-2 visa guide, which is a comprehensive guide with information about the E-2 visa and the process. And you'll receive a link to where you can sign up for our additional webinars. So for our panelists today, we're lucky to have Michaela Vrazdova. She's an associate at our firm who's one of our E-2 visa experts. My name is Kelly LeGrand-Wiener. I'm the managing attorney at Scott Legal and have also processed many E-2 visas in my time with the firm. So if you have a question during our presentation, please use the chat box. We will try to reserve some time towards the end of the webinar to answer your questions. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you on demand. So you'll get that link as well. So without further delay, we're going to jump right in and start talking about the E-2 visa requirements explained. All right, so as you can see on this slide, we kind of go through each of the requirements. So the E-2 visa is based on treaties that the United States has signed with other countries. So the formative requirement is you have to be a national of a treaty country in order to be eligible for this visa. So that's the first thing to consider. The second thing is that you must own at least 50% of the E-2 company or have operational control if you are an E-2 investor applicant. And then you must make an investment. So this is an E-2 investor visa, which means that you do actually need to invest some money. And that money has to be considered at risk and irrevocably committed. And what that means is the money has to be actually spent. You cannot just transfer money to a bank account and say that this was your investment. In order to be considered at risk, the funds must actually be either spent on startup expenses, or if you're purchasing a business, the money must be actually transferred to the seller of the business or put into an escrow account, to be transferred to the seller once the E-2 visa is approved. The investment must also be considered substantial. So we'll go into more detail as to what is substantial, and how you figure that out later in the presentation. But it does need to be, generally a significant amount of money. So, it depends on what type of business you're starting, but generally investments that are very low dollar value, $10,000, things like that, are not going to be considered substantial for this type of visa. Some typical expenditures that, that people will make are inventory, equipment, website, office supplies, rent, marketing, business entity setup. So you want to think about, if you're starting your company, what is it that you actually need for this company to start operating? And those are the type of expenditures that you're going to need to make. Some expenditures that are not generally considered very strong are kind of travel. If you need to kind of stay in hotels or pay for meals while you're taking business meetings, those types of expenditures are generally not good for the E-2 visa. They're just not considered very strong, by the government officials. Another thing with the E-2 visa, when we're talking about investment, is that there's 2 ways to do it. You can either kind of start up a brand new business. So that's where you're going to be making expenditures, to kind of get that business up and running, or you can purchase a business that's already running. And in that case, you have the option of either actually purchasing the business outright, transferring money to the seller, or you could have an escrow arrangement where you put the money into escrow, and have that be contingent on the sale going through, be contingent on being granted the E-2 visa. So another requirement for the E-2 visa is that your business cannot be marginal. And what that means is your business needs to be able to support more than just you and your family in the United States. And what that really translates to is hiring employees in the United States. So the business, if you're saying, well, I'm starting a consulting business and, I only need myself, I don't really need anybody else. That's not a good situation for the E-2 visa. You will be required to show that the business is going to support more than just you and your family. And so the business does need to plan to hire employees. Another requirement is that the business needs to be what's called real and operating. That means that if you have a pure startup, you want to show that you have your business bank account, you had contract signed, you have your entity formed, and that all that's left is, for you to enter the US on the E-2 visa to really start operating the business. If the business is already running, then you'll want to show things like tax returns, bank statements showing commercial activity, things of that nature. So that you do need, either way, whether it's a startup or a running business, you'll need to provide some evidence to meet this real and operating requirement. So another requirement is that you, as the applicant, the E-2 investor, are going to come to the United States solely to develop and direct the E-2 enterprise. This is where we look at, your background, how, you can prove how is it that you are well positioned to run a company. Is your background in this particular area? Do you have some type of other education or training or management experience that shows you would be a good fit to run this business? And that your plan when you enter the United States is to solely, kind of develop and direct this business, be the person kind of making the business work. And then finally, you have to have an intent to return to your home country upon the expiration of the E-2 visa. Generally, it's quite a low standard to meet this requirement. You are permitted to move your entire household to the United States. You don't have to show that you're maintaining a foreign residence in order to meet this requirement, but you do have to have the intent to leave. It is a non-immigrant, meaning temporary visa in the United States. So there's a question, can I buy a house to live in while on an E-2 visa? Yes, you can, but there's no problem with that. All right, so moving on to, who can apply and how long does the visa last? So as we mentioned in the last slide, the people that can apply are people who are treaty country nationals. So the first thing you need to do is check whether or not your country, the country you're a national of, has a treaty that permits you to benefit from the E-2 visa. And there are, many, many countries all over the world. There's a particular list that you can look at to determine if you qualify. Many European countries, such as the UK, France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, among many others. Also countries like Australia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, New Zealand, and Israel were also recently added to the list in the last few years. And your options for obtaining an E-2 visa are either purchasing an existing business or starting up a brand new business in the United States. So either is available for the E-2 visa. And how long will your visa be valid for? So the length of the visa is going to be based on something called a reciprocity schedule. That's what basically for individual countries will have different lengths of time the visa can be granted for based on how long they grant to US citizens for similar visas. So for many countries, you can be granted the visa for up to 5 years at a time, and it's renewable indefinitely. There are some countries, for example, Bangladesh, where your visa is only going to be granted for 3 months. And what that means is you can enter the United States and you'll be given 2 years in E-2 status. But when you leave the country, if you left before the 2 years, And after the 3 months was up, you would need to go back to the consulate and get a new visa in order to enter the United States again. So it's a good idea when you're getting ready to apply to just consider how long will the actual visa be granted for. Great. All right, so getting into how much investment is enough. What is going to be substantial. So you have to invest what is a substantial amount of money to get the E-2 visa. And there is no set minimum amount. So there's no kind of particular number you can look at and say this will work. But the amount must be substantial in light of the type of business you are starting. So for example, a service-based business like a consulting or a law firm would have a lower startup amount than something like a car manufacturer or a restaurant, where there are these large fixed costs that you have to get things set up. For lower investment amounts, which in the E-2 context is going to be really anything under 150,000 or 200,000, you want to be able to say that you've spent 100% of the cost to set up the business. So you want to consider, what type of business am I starting and what are reasonable startup costs for my type of business? What do I actually need to start operating? Can you include kind of market research reports, other industry reports that, kind of support your statements? Well, it takes X amount of money to start up this type of business. You can also get a letter from a certified public accountant who's perhaps analyzed your business plan, looked at your startup costs, and determined that that it's a reasonable amount of startup costs for this type of business. So that's something you can do if you feel your investment's on the lower side. That's what we're talking about today is these lower dollar amounts. That's a good thing to do, is to just kind of add some validity to your argument that you really have spent 100% of the cost to set up the business. Finally, when we're looking at the proportionality test, which means the amount of money that you spent versus the amount the objective amount that you need to set up the business. If you are buying a business, then the purchase price, as long as it's a third-party transaction, generally that purchase price is going to be considered 100% of the cost to set up the business, because it is the fair market value of the business. All right, and so now we will turn it over to Michaela to talk about some strategies to deal with a low dollar amount.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so as Kelly mentioned, if the investment amount is kind of on the lower side, it's important to explain, why your E-2 application is strong, and to still explain why the investment is substantial. So in case your investment amount is on the lower side, so let's say you invested around, you spent like $40,000 to $50,000, then there are mainly two sections of the E-2 application we generally kind of like to focus on, and we like to strengthen. So the first section would be the real and operating business section. So in this section, if your investment amount is on the lower side, we generally recommend that you have some letters of intent signed with potential clients, or you already have contracts with some clients signed. Another kind of thing is, if you are kind of like ready to start the business before your E-2 visa is approved, then we would submit evidence such as the company's bank statements showing that the business is already kind of operating and is already taking revenue. And then another thing we could submit, as Kelly already mentioned, is the letter from a local chamber of commerce. So this is basically a letter, usually for a small fee. You can join the local chamber of commerce in the kind of like in the city or town where your business is located, and the chamber of commerce will basically take a look at your business, and then we'll write you a letter kind of saying if they think the business will be kind of beneficial for a local economy. So we could submit that as well. And then the second section we could kind of strengthen if the investment amount is on the lower side. is kind of like the marginality section of the application. So here you could either hire employees if that's possible, or we could submit a strong business plan with your application. So you know, if it's possible, even if you're outside the US, at the time you are kind of preparing the E-2 application, and if it's possible to hire you as employees, you know, that will always be kind of extremely beneficial for the application, to show that, you know, okay, even though the investment amount is on the lower side, the business already, you know, hired 1, 2, or more employees, and will be, you know, kind of like generating more and more US jobs in the future. If that's not possible to hire employees before you get the E-2 visa, then we could submit a, you know, a strong business plan with the application, and the business plan would basically kind of like go over, you know, how many employees, on what positions you plan to hire in the next 5 years. So it would basically have like a personal hiring chart, and it would list the position, you know, their salaries, their job duties, and it, you know, the business plan would kind of like explain how many employees you plan to hire, and again, how the business will kind of like help the US economy. So let's look at these 2 examples here. So in the first example, you know, you are opening a business, and the investment amount is kind of like on the lower side. So let's say that you spend around $40,000 to $50,000, but you already hired 2 US employees, and the business already started taking revenues. So the business is already operating, and it's taking around $80,000 per month, and you already have around 10 clients. So in this case, you know, even though the investment amount is on the lower side, so let's say $40,000 to $50,000, you know, I would say that the application would still most likely be approved, just because the other, you know, aspects of the application are very strong. So you already hired the employees, you know, you already have 10 clients, and the business is already taking revenue. So so here I would say that, you know, this application would still, you know, most likely be approved. And then in the second example, you know, you are applying for an E-2 visa, and the investment amount is low. So let's say again around $40,000 to $50,000, but you don't want to invest any more money, and you don't want to hire anyone until until the visa is approved and you come to the US. So you know, I would say that in this case, the application is definitely kind of you know, riskier, because, you know, first the investment amount is on the lower side, and then the kind of like the other aspects of the application are not that strong. So, you know, here we would kind of suggest, you know, either hiring employees, you know, of course, submitting a strong business plan, but also kind of like, you know, trying to sign contracts with clients before we submit the application, or at least get some letters of intent from potential clients that would, you know, letters of intents are basically letters that, you know, you would get from potential clients that would basically explain that, you know, these clients are interested in your services, and once you come to the US, they plan to hire you. Perfect. So now let's go over some common E-2 visa expenditures. So what are some common E-2 visa expenditures? So you know, any money you spend on kind of like the company's website setup, you know, that can be counted as an E-2 investment. Any money you spend on equipment such as, you know, computer, printer, scanner, you know, phone, tablets, you know, all of that can be kind of like counted as part of the E-2 investment. Then, you know, in case you'll be selling products in the US, then any money you spend on inventory to purchase the inventory, that can be counted as an E-2 investment. You know, in case you are kind of, you know, you rent an office space and it doesn't have any furniture, then any furniture you purchase can be counted as an expenditure. Then any kind of like money you spend on intellectual property, you know, if that's, you know, relevant for your type of business, all of that can be counted as an investment. Any money you pay to your employees, you know, that can be counted as an investment. Any money you spend on legal fees, so fees you pay to your immigration lawyer, business lawyer, all of that can be counted as an investment. Then any money you spend on lease. So all of that can be counted. So for example, if you sign a lease agreement and you prepay 1 month, then the 1 month would be counted as an investment. But let's say that you sign a lease agreement and you prepay the whole lease for 1 year, then all of that amount could be counted as an investment.
Michaela, so someone had written in some questions beforehand regarding these expenditures. Can you include expenditures that were made before you started the E2 business? So let's say you made some expenditures a few months before you started your LLC, or even a few years before. Are those expenditures usable?
Yeah, generally you can include those. I mean, I would say as long as you are able to kind of like provide invoices, if the amount of those expenditures kind of like on the higher side, as long as you are able to provide kind of like invoices and show, from which bank account you made them, then yes, we could include those, even though they were made kind of like a long time ago. And then I'll just quickly go over some other ones. So, any kind of like office supplies, like licensing fees, if your business needs a license, that could be included. With regards to like car, including like the money you spend to buy a car. So this will kind of depend. So if you need the car to kind of for your type of business, then we could include it. So for example, businesses such as, food delivery, businesses, or something like Uber, or, some businesses where, the car is really like essential, and like needed to do the business, then yes, we would include the car. But if the car, if you have like a consulting business and you just, buy a car and you want to use it to get to work every day, in those cases, we would not be able to include it. And then, any money you spend on kind of like any softwares you need, like marketing, advertising, all of that could be, included as part of the E2 visa investment. So all of these expenses we just kind of like went through and that were listed on the slide were, like good or strong E2 visa expenditures. And now let's just go over quickly some expenditures that are considered to be, like weak, on the weaker side. So generally we would not include expenditures such as travel flights. So, for example, if you are outside the US and you are kind of like thinking to start a business in the US and you buy a flight ticket, we would generally not include it because the consulates, they just don't see kind of like the, expenditure like really kind of like, related to like starting the E2 business, and it's generally considered to be a weak expenditure. So we would generally not include that. Then any money you spend on, like hotels in the US or meals, or, any money you spend on taxis, Ubers, we would generally not include those. And any money you spend on entertainment. So, for example, if you have clients and you invite them, out for dinner or something like that, we would generally not include those as part of the E2 investment. And then any expenses that are directly reimbursed by your clients or customers, or any expenses that are paid to related parties, we would generally not include those. And so now let's go over some common challenges that are usually connected with consulting businesses. So for consulting businesses, theoretically, you can invest very low amount and get the business kind of like up and running. So, for example, you can buy a computer, you can buy a laptop, you can set up a website. And, nowadays you don't necessarily need an office space. So really laptop and a website is all you need to kind of like get the business started. So, let's say you can spend like $5,000 and get the business started, but that will not be enough for the E2 visa. So for the E2 visa, you have to show that you are committed to successfully running the business. And you, for the E-2 visa, you really have to show that you have made that kind of like significant, substantial upfront investment for the E-2 visa to be granted. So again, even for consulting businesses, we are talking about minimum investment of around, at least like $30,000 to $40,000. And you can think about this, when you can try to put yourself in shoes of the consular officer. So, if they get an applicant who spent like $4,000 or $5,000, they may not necessarily think that this applicant is kind of, has that much to lose and is that committed to kind of like successfully running the business. But if you really spend, $40,000 to $50,000, then the officer thinks like, okay, like this person really, invested substantial amount of money and is committed to kind of like successfully run the business in the US. And so, especially with consulting businesses, many people kind of like ask us like, okay, like, I don't really need a lot of things to get this business started. Like what can I spend the money on to kind of like increase the investment amount? So as I mentioned, like one good thing how to increase the amount is to kind of like prepay the office space. So, you can prepay it for like 6 months or 12 months. And, depending on, like which city you live, like that may increase the investment amount substantially. Then, you can invest in any kind of like equipment you need for you and your future employees. You can invest in marketing. And then one other thing that is or area where, you could spend the money on is to kind of like pay the employees. So, and this would have basically two advantages. So if you hire employees before the E-2 visa is granted, it would be extremely beneficial because the consulate would see that you already hired employees. And then any money you pay the employees before the E-2 visa is approved, like that can be included as part of the E-2 investment. So that would be a great way how to increase the investment amount. Perfect. And now Kelly will go over some challenges that are connected with real estate investments.
Perfect. Thank you, Michaela. And I just want to comment, I do see there's some questions in the Q&A box, and we should have some time at the end. So we'll answer all the questions at that time. So turning to E-2 visa challenges for real estate investments, a big challenge with these types of cases is that most consulates and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will immediately scrutinize real estate businesses more closely. Their concern is this an active company or is this just passive real estate ownership? So for example, purchasing a home and flipping that home, is just not going to be considered active enough, to be an E-2 business. So, on that note, real estate holding companies don't qualify. Just purchasing one property, putting it in the name of an LLC, that is not going to qualify for an E-2 visa. You really need to make sure that that's the scale of what you're doing in real estate is large enough that it's going to be considered a real and operating enterprise that can actually hire workers and not just kind of an idle, speculative investment. So, potential E-2 real estate companies, that we have done successfully. So real estate brokerage firms, a real estate management company, renovation or construction companies. And then house flipping is a tricky one because it is possible to get an E-2 when you're doing house flipping, often as kind of one piece of a larger company that's doing other real estate activities. If you're just doing house flipping, then you really need to be doing it on a very large scale. So to give you an example, we had a client that had purchased somewhere between 30 and 40 homes and was renovating and selling those homes. So that was, quite a large scale. Or someone who had purchased a large residential apartment building and was fixing up those apartments to sell, and then was also the property manager. So you really need to have an active business. And it's a very common question we get that people say, well, I own a property in the US and I'm going to fix it up and sell it. Can that be, counted for an E-2? And the answer generally is no. You're going to need to add more things to your business in order for it to be real and operating. And then additionally, you want to make sure that you have any proper licenses that you need. Real estate is a very regulated business, kind of in the country, in the US, but also in individual states. So anything that you're doing, you want to make sure you've investigated, do I have the proper licensing for this? Because it is something that you could be questioned on to ensure that you really have the ability to, develop and direct your business. All right. So let's talk about, E-2 visas for equity trading companies. So this type of business has some similar challenges to real estate in the sense that you need to convince the consulate or USCIS that you have an active business and you're not just engaging in kind of personal trading or just trading for family and friends. This is also a highly regulated industry. So you need to show you have the necessary licenses. You need to be able to explain how does your business structure operate to allow you to work within this very regulated industry. So similar to real estate, if you're doing this on a much larger scale, it's much more likely to be accepted as a legitimate business. So again, just placing your stock portfolio in the name of an LLC, this is not going to qualify. If you are really only kind of doing some, minimal trading for family and friends, that's also going to be a difficult business for an E-2. You want to be able to show you're going to market to a larger audience than just those family and friends. And you need to be able to show that there's going to be enough activity in the business that it's real and operating and not marginal, really able to hire and sustain employees in the United States with this business. All right, and I'll turn it back to Michaela for some E-2 visa adjudication trends and hot topics.
Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to discuss here is, E-2 visa and the Biden administration. So, has the E-2 visa approval rate kind of like changed with the new administration? So the answer here is, not really, because even during the previous administration, the E-2 visa approval rate was always pretty high, around, I would say, 89 or 90%. So we haven't seen kind of like a significant change with the new administration. Now, are the E-2 visas being adjudicated faster with the new administration? So here, unfortunately, the answer is no, but the reason is not the new administration. The reason is really COVID-19. Because of COVID-19, many consulates or most US consulates abroad were kind of like closed for some period of time in 2020. Then other consulates kind of like were operating in very kind of like had very limited operations in 2020. And also 2021, so it's currently taking longer than it used to pre-COVID to get the E-2 visa, but we are seeing improvements we have been seeing improvements in the last couple of weeks for sure. And then what happened to Baja? So Baja was an executive order. It was called Buy American, Hire American. And it was executive order that was kind of pronounced by the former administration. And the purpose, kind of like the main purpose of the executive order was to protect jobs of the US employees. I would say that the E-2 visa, in the E-2 visa kind of like area, this executive order did not have such a big impact as we saw with the kind of like H-1B or L-1 visas, but we did see its impact kind of in two areas. So one was when E-2 employees were applying for an E-2 visa. Many times the consular officer would ask the employees, like why a US worker could not do the job. And then, at the interview, the E-2 employees kind of like had to explain, like why that's the case. And then the second kind of like area where we saw its impact was that many US consulates wanted to see that the E-2 visa expenditures were made in the US. So this is like, you know, nowhere in the regulations, it says that, you know, you have to actually spend the money in the US. But we did see that many consulates, you know, when someone kind of like spent $100,000 and spend like 80,000 in the home country and 20 in the US, you know, like some consulates just did not like this. So, you know, the Bad American, Higher American executive order, you know, was kind of like terminated with the new administration. But I would say that some consulates may still, you know, kind of like focus on these two areas. So it's, you know, it's good to be kind of like ready, you know, to explain if you're applying for an E-2 employee visa, you know, why a US worker could not do the job. And we also kind of like still generally recommend that the majority of the money is actually spent in the US. So now, are consulates currently processing E-2 visas? So I quickly kind of like went over this, but I would say that, you know, generally nowadays the situation is much better than it was in like spring or summer 2020. But it is still taking longer time than it used to before COVID to get an E-2 visa. So, you know, I would say that most consulates are accepting E-2 visa applications, but it's just kind of taking them longer time to review the application, and it's taking them longer time to get you an E-2 visa interview appointment. So, you know, pre-COVID, there were some consulates where you were able to get an appointment in like 2 or 3 weeks. I would say that, you know, nowadays it would be probably, you know, at least like 7-8 weeks or just a couple more months to get an E-2 visa appointment. But we are seeing improvements in you know, most of the consulates around the world, and things are definitely kind of like speeding up. And then I quickly wanted to go over kind of like extending your status in the US. So, you know, in case you are already in the US on an E2 status, you have an option to file extension of status petition with USCIS, and this allows you to kind of stay in the US the whole time the petition is pending. So, you know, you would not necessarily need to leave and go to a consulate to attend an interview. You can just kind of like stay in the US and file the extension of status petition. You know, the main advantage obviously is that you can just stay in the US while the petition is pending, and if it's approved, you know, you can also like stay here and continue working for the business. But I would say that one disadvantage is, especially if you never filed a petition with USCIS before, then kind of like one disadvantage is that, you know, USCIS would want to, the USCIS petition would be considered like a brand new petition. So if you file the previous application at a consulate, you know, that would not have any impact on the USCIS petition, and you would still have to kind of like submit evidence about the original investment, about the source of funds and trail of funds. So, and those are kind of like areas USCIS kind of focuses a lot on, the source and trail of funds. So, you know, filing the extension of status petition in the US has definitely its kind of like advantages and disadvantages. And then the last thing I wanted to go over is the, you know, the E-2 visa and the national interest exception. So, you know, fortunately, starting November 8th, 2021, which was last Monday, you know, people no longer need the national interest exception to come to the US, because all the regional travel bans with the Schengen area countries, India, UK, and, you know, other countries were kind of terminated. So starting November 8th, if you are fully vaccinated, you know, you can just enter the US either on your already kind of issued E-2 visa, or if you are applying for a new visa, you know, you just have to show that you qualify for the visa itself, but you no longer have to show that you qualify for the national interest exception. Perfect. So now let's go over some issues and complex areas that come up with E-2 visas. So a common question we get is whether you need to hire employees before you apply for an E-2 visa and before the E-2 visa is issued. So the answer here is no. It's not kind of mandatory to hire employees before you get the E-2 visa. But in some cases, as we already discussed, if, for example, if the investment amount is very low, hiring employees may definitely be helpful for your E-2 visa application. Then another section is complicated source and trail of funds, and this is mostly for USCIS filings. So generally, if you are applying for an E-2 visa at a consulate, you just, the standard kind of everywhere is that you have to show that the money you are investing in the US is coming from a legitimate source and it's not coming from a criminal activity. And the consulates generally, don't require you to submit that much evidence about this, but that's not the case with the USCIS. So USCIS will want to see kind of like detailed documentation, about like where the money is coming from. So that's kind of like one area if you are kind of like thinking to file a change of status or extension of status petition with the USCIS, you will have to be kind of like able to provide detailed documentation about like where the money is coming from, like, how it got to your business account, and like, you will have to be able to provide detailed documentation about that. Then, loans. So loans are generally fine for an E-2 visa. Just one caveat is that the loan cannot be secured by the assets of the E-2 company, but can, it's fine if it's secured by your personal assets, but just not the assets of the E-2 business. And then gifts. So gifts are also fine for an E-2 visa. And the gift can come from your family, it can come from your friends, like it can come from anyone. Just, the donor, the person who is giving you the money will have to kind of like provide documentation showing where they got the money. So if the money is coming from the donor's personal savings, then we would need kind of like 2 or 3 most recent tax returns of that person. So then another area or another thing I wanted to mention is, E-2 visas for to investors. So sometimes, people have a business partner and they want to either kind of like start a new business in the US or buy a business and they want to own it 50-50. And they are, wondering if it's possible to get E-2 visa for both of them. So the answer is yes. You and your business partner can own the business 50-50. There are a couple important things to keep in mind here. So first is that each of you will have to invest kind of, equal or kind of like mostly equal kind of like amount of money in the business. So if one is investing 100,000, the other one should invest, 100,000 or somewhere around that, amount. It shouldn't be like 100,000 and 10,000, because then, that may raise questions definitely. And then one other important thing is that each of you will have to have kind of like executive or managerial role in running the business. So, what we have seen, from previous cases is that, one person can be, for example, the CEO, the other one can be like chief financial officer or chief product officer or something like that. But each of you will have to have kind of like executive and, kind of like a high level role in the business. And so what happens if there are, substantive changes in the E-2 business after you get the E-2 visa? So, one type of change can be change in ownership. So, for E-2 visa, it's important that you always own at least 50% in the business. So, for example, if you originally owned 100%, and then you sold someone 50%, as long as you still have the 50%, that's completely fine. There is no issue. but your ownership can never drop below 50%. So that's important thing to keep in mind. And then another type of change can be change in the type of business. So, it will depend on kind of like what's the plan changed you are planning to do. So for example, if you have like an IT consulting business and you now want to start a restaurant, you would need to kind of contact the consulate and get the approval from either the consulate or USCIS before you start this new business, just because the two businesses, IT consulting business and a restaurant are completely different. But if the change can be explained as kind of like an outgrowth of the initial company, then you may not necessarily need the approval of the consulate. So for example, if you own a restaurant and you got E-2 visa for the restaurant and you now want to start kind of do consulting in like the restaurant or food industry, that may be fine because it's kind of like related to the original business, and you may not need kind of approval from the consulate. So it will kind of depend on like what the change will be. And then last thing I wanted to quickly go over are family business purchases. So there is nothing in the regulations that would say that you cannot buy a business, an E-2 business from a family member. But I would say that these kind of purchases are definitely kind of like scrutinized by consulates, because consular officers may think that because you are buying the business from a family member, you are not paying the fair market value of the business. So in these cases, it's really important to kind of get a third party kind of like evaluation of the business, that kind of evaluates, okay, like the business is worth for example, $100,000 and you are paying $100,000. So, in these cases, definitely important to get that evaluation. So then you don't have kind of like issues about this at the interview. Perfect. So are there any questions?
Yeah, so I think we have a few questions here, Michaela, so we'll run through them one by one. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box as we go through this. So Michaela, I'll let you answer this question. If I get an E-2 visa, do I have to close my other business, e.g. selling on Amazon in the US, because an E-2 visa allows you to work only on the E-2 business?
Yeah, I would say, so again, it will kind of depend on, like what's the principal E-2 business doing, and also like are you selling on Amazon just because anyone can sell on Amazon just for like personal purposes? So is it really like a business you have on Amazon, or is it just you just sell some of your like personal things on Amazon every now and then? So I think the answer would depend on that, and also on like what's the principal E-2 business doing.
Right, exactly. I think I totally agree. And I think another thing to consider is that when you set up your E-2 business, you can have different lines of business. So we've done E-2 visas where somebody has had a gas station, and also a woodworking shop, so you can have these kind of disparate lines of business under one E-2. You just have to contemplate it at the beginning of your application and submit it to the consulate or USCIS so they feel comfortable, that you've invested all that you need to set up those lines of business. So you may just want to, kind of incorporate that if it is a business and not just selling your personal things on Amazon, you may just want to incorporate it into the E-2, even if it's different than the E-2 company that you're planning on starting. So I think this, another question, if I have low finances, I want to get more funds, can I get them from my father or another person? I think Michaela answered that. So yes, gifts are fine, loans are fine, as long as they're not secured by assets of the E-2 business. This next one I'll take, how many months of a bank statement do you have to add in an E-2 visa application statement? So it depends. So let's say that you are purchasing a business. and you want to show there's some commercial activity, you could include bank statements. You don't really always need to. You could, include tax returns instead. If you are starting up a brand new business, usually you're only going to have kind of maybe one bank statement that shows you've, put money in, or if you put money in and then invested, then you would include any of the bank statements that show those investments. So there's no kind of set number of bank statements you need to show. The point is just what are the, if the bank statements show investments, you need to include that. So that's the answer to that. And so then Michaela, this is an interesting new thing that's just happened as of last Friday. Someone is asking, do we need an EAD for a spouse? So for an E-2 spouse, do you need an EAD, and what documents can you use to prove that they can work if you don't need an EAD?
Yeah. So this was just exactly. So this was just released last Friday, and we are kind of waiting for further guidance. But basically, what the policy that was released on Friday said is that E-2 spouses will in the future, E-2 spouses will no longer need the EAD, and they can just kind of if they have E-2 visa, or if they are in the US on an E-2 status, they can automatically work. The problem is that there's one provision in the new policy that says that the government is kind of will now change its system, because now when an E-2 spouse logs in on the I-94 website to get the most recent I-94, it just says what status is this person in. It just says E-2, and so the government will now need to implement change when it will kind of distinguish, is it an E-2 investor, is it an E-2 spouse, or is it an E-2 child? So the policy basically says that yes, spouses of E-2 spouses will no longer need the EAD, but they need to kind of implement this new change, and they will need to update the I-94 system. And until the system will kind of show that when the spouse logs in, that the spouse is here on E-2, spousal status, I believe that until then, the spouse would still need the EAD. So hopefully they will kind of make the update soon, but we kind of haven't heard, when that will happen yet.
Right, exactly. I believe they've been given about 120 days to comply, but within that, we just don't know exactly when that will happen, but hopefully soon. And it should get easier, in the next few months. So another question, my B-2 visa expired a month ago. Can I still apply for an E-2 visa going back to my home country without negatively affecting my application? I'm not really sure what this is asking. If you are outside the country and your B-2 visa expired, it has no impact on, your ability to get an E-2. It's a different visa. If you're talking about, kind of remaining in the country and you've overstayed your B-2 visa, then that's a different situation. And yes, could potentially have an impact on your E-2 visa. So if there's been an overstay of your visa, yes, that could have a negative impact on an E-2, because you will have to disclose that when you apply for your E-2. It doesn't, it's not a hard bar. It doesn't prevent you necessarily from getting the E-2, but it is a complicating factor for your application. So another, I'm a civil engineer educated in Egypt and live in Saudi Arabia. Shall I need some approval to start a business in real estate? Also with this question, I'm not 100% sure what this is asking. If you want to get an E-2 visa in the United States to work in a real estate business, then yes, you need an approval to do that. You need the E-2 visa approval. If you're talking about kind of the regulatory requirements for starting a business in real estate, yes, they exist. They're different based on each state, and you need to research, what you need to do to comply on that front. So Michaela, I'll let you have this question. If an applicant buys a business worth 3 to 4 million, do they need to show 50% partnership because their family member they've invested $100,000 in a business that's worth 3 to 4 million? So would that be approved?
Yeah, so this is kind of like the last thing I mentioned, like the family business purchases. So exactly, if you're buying a business from or portion of the business from a family member, then it would be important to submit the fair market value evaluation from a third party. And then, so if the evaluation says that the business is worth, 4 million, and you are buying 50% for 100,000, or like anywhere really like less than 2 million, then, that would definitely kind of like raise questions at the interview. And, then the officer would basically argue that you did not make the substantial investment because, you didn't invest like what's the business is worth. So yeah, if the business is worth like 3 to 4 million, then you should pay for 50%, you should pay the, the fair market value of what it's worth.
Perfect. So then how can I start the business before submitting my file for the E-2? So, I mean, if the question is, how do you get a real and operating business, before you can run it? As we discussed earlier in this, in this webinar, to prove real and operating, you can incorporate your business, set up a business bank account, make investments, get a website. If you actually want the business to start running before you have the E-2, you can hire employees in the United States to do that. That's also very strong for your application. The one thing you cannot do is you cannot enter the US and work in the US until you actually get the E-2 visa. So this one I'll give to you, Michaela. If we get an E-2 visa with my husband as the main applicant, can we also work on building our real estate portfolio under the wife's name separate from the E-2? So can an E-2 spouse purchase investment properties?
Yeah. So that's, that's completely fine. There is no issue with that. You can buy, even the E-2 investor or E-2 spouse can just, buy property in the US. There is no issue with that. Right.
It's just purchasing a property is essentially a passive investment. You can do that. No problem. You don't need a visa for that. What if I give the money to my wife to start the business? Is this an accepted gift? So yes, it is possible for a husband to gift a wife, the funds. The key again is just you need to show that there's a legitimate source of that money. And if you have a refused B1, B2 visa, will it affect your E-2 application? Not necessarily. It will have to be disclosed on your what's called your DS-160 application. It just depends on what the reasons for the refusal were. So it's not, it is a factor to consider. It's something to discuss, closely with your attorney. If there's a particular reason why it was denied, it could be a problem, but you can still get an E-2 visa issued if you've had other visa denials. There's a question about our fees. Please, I'd say reach out to us separately. When we can provide you with a package of information, that's specific to our fees or our engagement letter. I'll give this one to you, Michaela. I'm a Belgian national residing in India. Should I file from Brussels or from India?
Yeah, so this will depend. Because India is not an E-2 visa treaty country, I'm not even sure they would kind of accept the E-2 visa application. So it would, you would kind of have to reach out to the consulates in India if they would even be able, to adjudicate it. I would say, currently, our experience is that India is pretty backlogged. So Brussels may definitely be a better option.
Perfect. Fully agree with that. All right. So thank you. That was all of our questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating and for your great questions. Thank you, Michaela, for sharing your knowledge. And we hope everybody has a nice day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.